Good evening all and welcome. Tonight's video has some dark and triggering content, so if you are easily disturbed, do not proceed. I would also like to give a huge welcome to Amanda Jane from The Darkest Hour, who will be joining us tonight. If you enjoy her narrations, please check out their channel, which can be found in the description and will be shown at the end of the video. But for now, it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. When I was in elementary school, one of the boys a few grades ahead of me was Carl Doob. I was 2 or 3 grades below him, so I didn't have much contact with him outside of recess. In the 4-square line, he often made it a point to stand right behind me and yank on my pigtails as hard as he could, whipping them around under the pretense that I was a horse and he was riding me. He also used to bring knives to school and would sometimes threaten some of the classmates with them when they did something to make him angry. At one point, he actually pulled one on a girl after school out behind school. Why nothing was officially done about it, I don't know. But my school, being very small, was not known for being on top of the disciplinary side of things. There was a number of smaller things, the hair pulling, just the general way he acted, that led to me being uncomfortable whenever he was around. I wasn't alone in this regard. Former classmates have also expressed feeling uneasy in his presence. To my relief, he ended up moving away, and none of us heard anything from or about him for a number of years. That is, of course, until one day he showed up on the local news, having been arrested for the murder of Nicole Cable. He made a fake Facebook profile, lured her out of her house, kidnapped her, duct taped her, and left her in the back of his dad's pickup truck. His intention was to pretend to find her and be the hero. When he went back, he found that she was already dead. He dumped her body in the woods and covered it in sticks. They found her about a week later. I was in school when I read the article and had to go to the nurse's office because I felt so weak and sick. It's very disconcerting to think a murderer used to yank on my hair.
This happened about a month ago, and I still cannot shake this traumatic event. I'm a receptionist for a professional office building in Pasadena, California. A female in my mid-20s who spends the long, boring days at my desk listening to my favorite murder, crime junkies, and my new obsession, Let's Not Meet. So, it was a normal Tuesday at the office. I get off around 6 p.m. and lock everything up. I make my way down the stairs to the lit-up parking lot and say goodnight to the standing security guard. I pull out my keys in preparation for the long walk to my car, which is located in the employee parking lot. You see, the employee parking lot is a block away from my office building on a secluded street with literally no streetlights or through traffic. I'm not sure why this street has 0 streetlights, but it does. Normally, it's not that dark by 6 p.m., but since it's November, it's pitch black by that time. So as a routine, I always pull out my keys while I'm in the well-lit-up parking lot and call my boyfriend just in case I get murdered or something. This situation made me realize that my boyfriend cannot help me through the phone. So I'm talking to my boyfriend, keys in hand, and I see a tall, dark figure on the sidewalk that I'm walking on to get to my car. I say something to my boyfriend, and I see the dark figure walking towards me. So I flip my phone light on, and I shine it in his face. He says in less nice words and aggressively, "Who are you talking to?" I immediately go off the sidewalk and into the street to get away from him, and I say, "My boyfriend?" I could tell right away that he was a dirty meth head homeless man with a huge beard, khaki shorts, and a ball cap. He then starts yelling at me, more obscenities, and again, "Who are you talking to?" but louder. Then he follows me into the street. I literally stop and show him my phone like an idiot trying to prove that I wasn't talking to him. He then comes up to me at an arm's distance and starts calling me awful names and demanding that I go to the other side of the street, as if he owned the place. We are both in the middle of the street now. I knew if I crossed to the other side, I would just have to cross again, as my car was on the side of the crazy homeless man. I told him, aggressively, "Get away from me. I'll call the police right now." And I had the most disgusted look on my face. He then puts his hands in the shape of a gun and puts his fingers up to my head in the middle of a pandemic. And in a meth-induced slur, he says, "I'll kill you. Right here, you. I'll kill you." My heart sank. At that moment, I realized this guy was out of his mind, angry and violent. I start to rush towards my car, all while my boyfriend's on the phone saying, "What's going on? Get in your car. Put your keys between your fingers and run." I see the man run towards my car. Luckily, I dodged him. I pressed the unlock button and got in super quick. He's now standing in front of my car and proceeds to kick the front bumper hard, screaming at me, saying, "I better not call the cops," on repeat. He then runs behind the dumpster and is like spying on me from behind the dumpster as I'm pulling out. He then starts running around my car towards the front, and I truly thought I'd have to run him over. He starts chasing my car down the road and then stops at his belongings. I peel into my office building and I flag down the security guard, hysterical. I told him there's a crazy man that just threatened to kill me. I call the cops and see that the man is booking it down the street, which gave me the perfect view of his face and outfit. The cops sent officers out and I left the scene 5 minutes later. The crazy man was still on the corner, just standing there when I was leaving. So I yelled something at him as I drove off. He tried to run after my car. Apparently, the cops couldn't find him, even sent a helicopter. I later found out that he'd tried to rob my coworker that night, but was unsuccessful. The next morning, I saw the crazy man back in front of the employee parking, but 2 cop cars were surrounding him. He was arrested. I was happy, but anxious that I had to see this crazy man yet again. He proceeded to hang around that street for the next 2 weeks. I constantly saw him in the morning and on my lunch. I was so paranoid that he was looking for me. I thought that that's why he kept coming back. He must be looking for me. I messaged our office building manager, and they got a trespassing order on the dude. I hadn't seen him again until this Monday. He was sleeping at the exact same spot where I encountered him. My heart sinks every time I see him, and I relive my trauma all over. Our office building now has employees move cars over from the employee parking lot to the main around 4 so that no one's walking in the dark anymore. And we use a buddy system now. I've got 2 pepper sprays that I don't go anywhere without. I always thought that my obsession with true crime had prepared me for any scary situation. After this night, I realized that no amount of true crime pods could have prepared me to fight off someone who has the will to harm me. If this man had a real gun, I'd be done for. So, crazy meth head homeless man that almost killed me, let's not meet.
My girlfriend and I took some time out to do some backpacking and traveling the world. We went to some incredible places and met some interesting people. But our most interesting story is most probably this one. As I've said before, we went all over. Myanmar, Bolivia, Mexico, and many places that people said were a bit unsafe in their reputation. However, we are both pretty good at reading people and staying out of trouble. so we never had any major incidents. We were on a fairly tight budget at this point in our journey, as we had recently been in Japan and wanted to chill for a bit before finding some work in Vietnam. We decided to volunteer on a Cambodian island, Koh Rong San Loem. It's a bit of a luxury island full of resorts that we wouldn't normally be able to afford and stay at, so working seemed like a good gig. I worked behind the bar at this resort and my girlfriend worked in the restaurant. In return, we got to sleep in the dorms and had our meals for free. The manager told me that since I was working behind the bar, it was quite likely that I would run into a Scottish/English guy who lived on the island and would likely come see me, and that his name was Dog. It didn't take long for this to take place. A fairly old guy in his late 50s, early 60s came into the bar, rather tall, powerfully built, and accompanied by a massive Rottweiler, which he quickly told me was also called Dog. We had a bit of a laugh, taking the piss out of each other. He was making fun of me for being Scottish, and I was making fun of him by going by the name Dog and being English. Standard British nonsense. I noticed he was always wearing a wife beater, which said Dog's Offshore Bar, and had a picture of his Rottweiler on it. I got to know more about Dog the man. He used to work in construction and offshore, as did I, and we had quite a bit to talk about, and heaps of opportunities to talk, as he usually arrived for his first beer at 7 a.m. and was clearly an alcoholic. But he never struck me as a bad person early, just as a sad, complicated one when you talk to someone who's homeless. Anyone who's ever been to Vietnam, Thailand, or Cambodia, pretty much any Southeast Asian country, will understand how rare it is to see a dog that's not some kind of street mutt or tiny pet. Dog's huge dog would stand out even in Europe. Even for a Rottweiler, it was huge, massively muscular, with a metal chain to give some semblance of control, if it was to kick off. I really liked dogs, so was quite interested in what this huge dog was doing on the island, and always made sure to have some water out for it. It was friendly enough but never left his owner's side, and seemed to be a working dog. In terms of intensity, it was clearly a guard dog. It turned out the dog was actually a Finnish drug dealer's dog, and that Dog, the person, had bought him. He told me the dog had an attack command that he kept him primed by, using it often on other island dogs. He told me it had killed multiple dogs this way. I didn't believe this at first, but there was an island dog the manager would often leave food out for, and this dog would come near the bar usually when Dog's monster dog wasn't about. But that night, he must have been hungry enough to brave it, and Dog hissed the command, and Rottweiler bounded for the island dog, knocking over chairs and all sorts until he was called off. It was pretty scary. One night, I was sat at the bar talking with Dog about this job I would be taking on soon at a digital marketing company. I was in talks with the CEO at this company, and it was a digital marketing job, which I would work from home or coffee shops, updating and improving websites. He said it sounded made up, and that the company was likely some kind of con to get my bank details. I told him it was a real company, and that I had Googled it. He was really drunk at this point, and the restaurant was now closed, so my girlfriend joined us, and we were all having a beer at the bar. He told my girlfriend how I believed everything I read online, and how I shouldn't do that. He said, people publish all kinds of made-up stuff there, and I asked what he was referring to, and he said, never Google me. So I was like, how could I Google you? Your name's Dog. If I Googled you, all I would see is a picture of an Alsatian. But then I remembered those tops he wore, Dog's Offshore Bar. So I told him, I'm gonna Google you, laughing. He was getting quite annoyed, but at this point, other than owning a weaponized canine, I thought he was pretty harmless. I was wrong. I began reading out loud the interesting things I found out about his bar and related stories. One of the particular interesting ones was about a conviction. The joking and laughing stopped, and I quickly stopped reading out loud. I looked quickly to my girlfriend and I could see the smile leave her face as she realized we were drinking with a killer. It turned out this guy had murdered his Thai wife and then been briefly imprisoned before paying bail, as you can pay bail for murder in Thailand, and then fleeing the country before trial. He had stabbed her, and his alibi to the police was that he couldn't have killed her because he was screwing a ladyboy on the beach at the time. He told us that he had been framed, and that his wife's ex was in the police, and he had killed her for moving on. I was nodding along to everything he said, and trying my best to show that I agreed with him while making sure the machete I used to open up coconuts for cocktails was within easy reach, should the beast be given a command. He told us about how hard it was being one of the few white guys in Thai prison, how he had to attack guards to get into solitary confinement, and then they beat him up mercilessly. He told us they used to leave shanks in his room and put them in the yard with pedophiles for him to kill. He told us that he had killed before he went to prison, and that he killed while he was inside, but he didn't kill his wife. His wife was a Thai prostitute he met while trafficking women from Thailand to Singapore on his boat, the same one he used to flee Thailand after his arrest and set up his bar, Dogs Offshore Bar, with the tagline, "Dogs welcome, wives must be kept on leashes or under control." We both acted like we believed him and eventually he left. The whole night, however, I was waiting next to the door for him and his dog to come for us. I even propped a bin up against the door so anyone coming would knock it over, and we would maybe have a chance to react. I nearly attacked my friend when he came in. I was so scared. We quickly decided to leave after this, and only saw Dog once more. My girlfriend was opening a can of coconut milk for a curry, and he came by and jokingly asked if she needed a knife, and he patted his back pocket. The guy is known as Mick the Pom, or Mick the Dog if you want to Google this. If you Google Dogs Offshore Bar, you'll see what I did. He was living on a tent on the island with his dog, keeping watch while he slept. I'm not sure if he still lives there now. But Dog, let's not meet again.
So I was about 7 or 8 months pregnant with my daughter, and I was 20 years old at the time. I needed to stop and get makeup from the dollar store on my way home from work. I've done it 1,000 times before. This dollar store is literally 3 minutes from my house, and it's my go-to store when I need something fast and cheap. Well, I go in, and I start browsing. It's the dollar store. It's not like I was actually going to leave with just makeup. But I notice this guy walking behind me. No big deal, right? He's probably just doing the same thing I'm doing, looking at junk. So I grab a few things, throw it into my basket, all while the dude is casually following me down aisle after aisle, looking at the junk. Eventually, I move on to the makeup aisle. I'm standing there, trying to decide which $5 foundation I'm going to butcher next. And I kid you not, this man is suddenly standing next to me, in the makeup aisle. And by next to me, I mean less than a foot away, looking at lip stain. Now at first, I wasn't too concerned. Again, it's the dollar store and people are weird. But something about him being so close to me in that moment really wigged me out. Here I am, a 5'2", very pregnant post-teen, essentially a watermelon person, who struggled to walk, let alone run more than 20 feet at a time without having to stop and catch my breath. Of course, the only thing going through my head was, Jesus, I'm too tired to be kidnapped right now. Which at the time, I thought was a joke. Who would even attempt to snatch a pregnant lady? I doubt I'd even fit in their van. Imagine the amount of inconvenient, non-criminally consistent bathroom breaks. That really put a damper on their plans. You know, all those dumb, unrealistic thoughts that you think and try to make yourself feel less weird in a weird situation. Anywho, I acknowledge that this guy is creeping, and I grabbed the last foundation bottle that I had looked at, not caring if it was even the right color, and I went to the counter to check out. Dude followed me again. He was right behind me in line with absolutely no merchandise. Guess he ended up buying candy or something from the counter. I paid for my crap and immediately called my fiancé, who was at work, before walking out of the store. I made a point to state, somewhat loudly, that I needed him to stay on the phone with me until I pulled out of the parking lot. I was pretty freaked out by this point, but I made it to my car and out of the parking lot. Cool, almost home. I happened to glance in my rear view at a red light, and the guy was, I kid you not, behind me in his car. Through tears and absolute panic, I ended up pulling into a gas station that my fiancé's best friend was managing. Dude followed me there too. So I ended up waiting in the office for Dude to finally leave, 15 minutes later. Fiancé's friend wanted to call it in, but I was tired and high off of pregnancy hormones. I wasn't sure if this guy was actually following me or if I was just overreacting and paranoid. I didn't want to get this guy in trouble for just running errands or whatever, so I convinced him not to. Thinking about this now, I probably should have let him call.
We lived in an old mill house converted into about 3 stories of flats. We were in the loft/attic conversion, and it was easily my favorite flat in the world. The main door led straight outside, so we didn't have to deal with a close, and the staircase was wrought iron. Downstairs, we had the most ridiculous, stereotypical Scottish junkies. They were shooting up constantly. They had 4 kids in a tiny 1-bedroom flat. They were abusive towards each other, constantly shouting and screaming, banging on walls, the whole 9 yards. They would wake us up at 3 a.m. having loud-ass parties with their junkie friends. One night I finished a stock take at my work and didn't get home till 4 a.m. I walked upstairs, and as I passed their door I heard the worst noise in the world. As someone that was then training to be a teacher, this honestly had me crying like a baby. I heard a little girl screaming for her dad to stop hurting her. She was crying and begging, and it tore me apart. I called the police, which we had done before for noise reasons, and told them that it sounded like a small child was being beaten, and then, well, you can guess what was happening. And that if they didn't get there within 10 minutes, myself and my husband would need to deal with it. 3 cars, a riot van, and a social worker showed up within 5 minutes, and I was waiting outside for them. The scum bastard was actually doing that to his 3-year-old daughter, while his friends shot up and watched. The social worker let me hug the little girl while they got everyone situated. She was tiny. This little tiny bundle wrapped in a blanket sobbing in my lap. It ruined me. I couldn't sleep properly for months. They were arrested, the kids sent away, and I never knew what happened after that. They never came back. We left 6 months later.
It was probably only after my close call that my mind really started to run away with what could have happened were it not for my dog. I'm a 26-year-old female. I live with my fiancé, my 2 cats, and my dog, Rowan. Our house is literally less than a minute away from a huge farmer's field that is frequented by many dog walkers at all times of the day. Me and my significant other often take turns walking Rowan around the field throughout the day. It was only around 7:30 p.m., and it was still really bright and sunny. Rowan was letting me know that it was time to go for a walk, so while my partner was tinkering in the garage, I grabbed his leash and headed to the field. Let me quickly tell you about Rowan. He's a 2-year-old Rottweiler who's very loving and playful, if a little daft, but would not hurt a fly, not a bad bone in his body. He's also extremely well-trained. We made sure to put the effort in, as he's a big dog breed with a bad rep, so we wanted to make a point of not feeding stereotypes. I'm very much of the opinion that there's no bad dogs, just bad owners. Unfortunately, we've had some run-ins with some not-so-good dog owners, so Rowan gets a little nervous when meeting new dogs and people, but we're working on it. Anyways, back to the story. We're walking around the farmer's field, and Rowan is off sniffing and peeing on every single blade of grass in sight. And I always keep an eye out for other walkers anyway, due to Rowan being a little nervous. So I clocked a guy walking on his own down the path toward me, fairly far away. At first, I thought nothing of it, as plenty people walked this route without their dogs. We were just coming out of lockdown in the UK. As the guy got closer, I noticed that he was in a full tracksuit with the hood up, which was odd. It was 23 degrees Celsius, so shorts and t-shirt weather. He then took a small path off the field, leading through some bushes. It was a public-made shortcut rather than an official public footpath, but it was well enough used, so I kept walking, thinking nothing of it. At about 15 meters away from the path he took, Rowan shot back to my side, immediately dropping the mouthful of dirt he'd been pretending not to eat. I petted him, and I noticed that he was standing super alert, staring at the path entrance. When I looked up, I caught a glimpse of the man peeking around the edge of the bushes that concealed the entrance. I stopped dead in my tracks, and Rowan's fur stood on end as he positioned himself in front of me. It took me a second to realize that this man had been watching and waiting in the bushes for me to approach. My current route would have meant I'd be walking right by the path's opening. My stomach dropped as I realized we were the only ones around on the field. I had this weird moment where I was almost trying to convince myself that I was overreacting, but then the guy whistled. Not a wolf whistle, but as if he were trying to get my dog to come to him. Rowan was having none of it, though, and I definitely took that as my cue to trust my stranger danger instincts. I immediately turned around and sped walked back the way we came, simultaneously pulling out my phone and dialing my partner's number. I ended up having to clip on Rowan's leash to get him to walk with me, and he was not taking his eyes away from the path. He was even growling a little, which was so out of character, and it put me on edge even more. I glanced back, and the man had edged slightly out of the bushes, watching me walk away. My partner answered the phone after a few rings. I was only halfway through stammering out the story, and he was already sprinting up to the field to meet me, telling me to stay on the phone, but to keep an eye on the man. The man in the tracksuit now fully came out of the bushes and just stood, staring at me, walking away. I dared a quick look away from him, towards the entrance of the field, to see my fiancé jogging towards me. He was relieved I was okay, but was also immediately pointing and shouting, "Is that him?" Clearly furious at what this man might have had in mind, had Rowan not picked up on him hiding in the bushes. I eventually convinced my fiancé not to confront him, as he was still standing, staring, almost taunting us. You never know what people might be capable of, or have concealed. We came off of the field and took Rowan on a different walk, which he was more than happy about. I've never been so proud of Rowan for stepping up and protecting me. Safe to say he got plenty of treats and fussing when we got home. So, creepy man in the bushes, let's not meet.
I was 15 at the time, around 9 years ago. I lived with my parents in Lacey. I'm a pretty big stoner, and of course my parents didn't approve of this. Me being a minor at the time, we had just moved into a new house from my previous childhood home. The previous home had a good discreet smoke spot that was very close. In this new area, there were a couple of small parks which were good to go to smoke in private without disturbing the public or being caught. However, they were a bit further away. I was big into longboarding and skateboarding at the time and didn't get my driver's license and first car until I was 18, so I traveled by board or by bus generally. The mentioned parks are about 10 minutes away by board, so if you're hauling ass, which may not seem like it's very far, but when you're trying to have a quick smoke and resume what you're doing at home, it can be a bit of a burden. Especially, I try to avoid physical activity while smoking, as it isn't very good for your heart and makes it work harder than it needs to. There are a few inclines on the road which makes it all more a chore to go back and forth on. This particular day, I was fed up with having to mob to the regular spots I would go to. I decided to go to this one spot I had never been to, but had seen in passing that was perhaps 5 minutes closer, in a large clearing off the side of a lesser thoroughfare, with houses surrounding its borders. There were some trees in front of the entrance from the sidewalk. It appeared to be some sort of undeveloped land with a small wildlife reserve of sorts or something like that. About 4 to 6 acres of tall grass with fenced houses belonging to different neighbors on 3 sides, with the sidewalk being the front for reference. It was during wintertime, so it was getting dark at around 4 or 5 p.m. I don't remember exactly what time it was, maybe 3 p.m. or so, but I do remember it was starting to get a little dark, but not dark enough to be scared of anything yet. I approached the small tree line bordering the sidewalk and dismounted my board. I had my backpack which had all my smoking supplies, and I walked into the middle of the tall grass, making sure no police were driving by to witness me entering the area beforehand, just to be sure I wouldn't have to worry about anything. I sat down crisscross applesauce on my board, being positioned in the middle of the tall grass. I was facing the direction of the sidewalk and tree line, as I assumed that would be the only spot that I would need to keep a lookout for, primarily to keep an eye out for cops or nosy passers-by who might report some teenage kid lighting up. I don't remember what I did as I sat there, probably listening to music from my phone as I rolled the joint and enjoyed the scenery. It was pretty peaceful and secluded for about 30 yards away from a road, and I could see and hear the traffic faintly go by, being partially obscured from the trees. After rolling and smoking the joint, knowing me, I think I smoked a few more bowls out of my pipe. At this point I had lost myself in my newfound spot, quite satisfied with the solitude and safety it had provided me. It was probably around 3:40 at the time, and almost an hour had passed. I figured I should have probably wrapped up and gone home to play some video games. It was starting to get darker. By now the light in the sky was already fading, and had faded further. I couldn't see too far ahead of where I was looking due to the retreating light, already obscured by the ever-present gloomy clouds the area is known from. I started to pack up my stuff, zipping the marijuana and marijuana accessories in multiple Ziploc baggies and then some. It was kind of a chore with the whole bag system, but any stoner, especially minors living with parents, know that it's a necessary burden to bear, to not get caught by stinking up the house with the obvious aroma. As I was packing, I always kept my head on a swivel, as I naturally always kept my eye on my surroundings. I looked behind me and to my left opposite the road. As I was doing a 360-degree scan, what I saw made me immediately stop what I was doing. I saw what I believed to be a man walking towards me, and then he stood still as I noticed him. He was about 20 yards away when I first saw him. At first, I thought he was a resident of one of the homes which bordered the clearing I was in, coming to tell me off for what I was doing, or come to tell me he was going to call the cops. I'm a loud cougher when I smoke, so I figured I'd been caught. I soon realized that, like I said before, all the houses were surrounded by fences, and I didn't see any fences that had gates that you could walk through, so as to create easy access from people's backyards to where I was. So where this man had come from, I couldn't really tell. He just stood there not moving, but facing me he was. He didn't say a word. I couldn't make out what he was wearing. My vision isn't the best in the first place, even with my glasses, so I had no way of knowing if he was a resident, or perhaps some homeless man. A minute or so passed. Then, he suddenly resumed his walk towards me, without a word. He just walked towards me, at a normal pace, dead set on coming up to me, silently. I didn't want to find out what he had in mind. I threw everything in my backpack without finishing putting it all back in the baggies, packed up my board, and began running, quickly. I didn't look back, and skated as fast as I could home. Before entering my neighborhood, I resumed the rest of my bagging outside the street that enters my neighborhood. I didn't care if people saw. I just wanted to get my contraband secured and get the hell back to my house. I'm very glad I kept an eye on my surroundings. It is creepy that I am simply not sure where the man came from. If he was there the whole time and in hiding or what. I think what scared me the most was how silent he was as he approached me, with me having no idea what his intentions were.
I'm 19, and I was at a mall in France with my friend in the afternoon, around 4 p.m. After a few hours in that mall, we decided to go home. For that, we had to take the subway. The subway station was underneath the mall, so we took the escalators to get to the station. My friend was behind me, on my right, on the escalators. I suddenly felt someone staring at me, and really close to me. I naturally thought that it was my friend, but it wasn't. I turned my head and I saw my friend looking at the man who was standing behind me. I first thought that he wanted to overtake me to go faster in the escalator, so I moved to let him pass. At this point, I'm at the right on the escalators, my friend just behind me, and the man in front of me is at the left. But weirdly, he wasn't watching in front of him. He'd turned around to stare at me. At this point, I understood that he didn't want to go faster, but just wanted to be close to me. For some reason, I didn't really want to know. My friend and I were a little bit confused, and we were talking to make it less weird and awkward. As we walked off the escalators to take the stairs that finally lead to the station, the man was still in front of us and suddenly stopped. He turned around, stopped me, and asked me where the mall was. This made no sense as we were in it. I politely told him that we were in the mall. Then, he started to talk faster as he saw that we wanted to go to the station. He was next to me and asked me if I wanted to become his mistress. He seemed thrilled and tried to convince me by saying he would buy me a lot of clothes and that I could become his doll. At this point, I knew that I better run away with my friend. We started to run, took the stairs, and as fast as we could, entered the station. We stopped to check if he was following us. Fortunately, he wasn't. A few weeks later, I was on the train with another friend, and we were talking about that mall, saying that we should go there together someday. As we were talking about the mall, I told her what had happened to me the last time I went. She seemed confused and asked me to describe the man. So I described him as white, chubby, short man, mid-50s with gray hair. She looked even more confused, and she told me that the last time she was at this mall with a friend of hers, a man who looked exactly like my description came up to them and asked for directions to the mall. They answered him, and then they went to the McDonald's in the mall. They were at the order machine and noticed that the man was standing behind them. My friend turned around and asked him why he'd followed them. He started to say some incoherent things, and finally asked for their numbers, telling them how attractive they were. They both told him to leave, but he didn't. He finally left because of the amount of people who were entering the place. So I conclude that this man has his own modus operandi and his location. I haven't gone to that mall since, because of lack of time and then quarantine. So I don't know if he's currently still hanging in that mall. Next time I go there, I'll check out if he's there or not. If he is, I'll make an update. I know that those kinds of things happen a lot, but I felt insecure that day and wondered what would have happened if there were less people around us.
This happened when I was 14 years old. My family ran a summer camp of sorts where we invited kids from Korea and China over to our house in the US for a few months. We would go on tours of the country showing them landmarks and famous attractions. One of the stops along our tour of the East Coast was the famous museum, the Smithsonian. The day we visited, I was not feeling too great. The road trip was long. I was packed in the back of my car with a bunch of strangers, and I had a nosebleed right before we had to step out the car. Even though the Natural History Museum was my favorite place in the world, the combination of feeling sick made me want to get away, and after speeding through the exhibits, I went to the bathroom to calm down. I didn't feel like walking, so I sat down in the rotunda with an elephant on it, waiting for my family and guests to finish up the tour. While I was sitting, a short woman sat down next to me on the bench and began touching my shoulders. She began to speak to me in Korean, asking my name, my birthday, and a whole lot of other personal info. I was mostly confused and gave vague, short answers. The whole time she was rubbing my shoulders and generally acting way too close. When I saw her face, she had a sad expression in her eyes. I didn't feel any malice, but it was still very weird. Over time, I grew more and more uncomfortable, and I stared straight at the ground, hoping my parents would hurry up. Eventually, she got up and left, and one of the guests showed up to tell me they were leaving soon. The more I thought about it afterwards, the weirder it felt. I had been alone for several minutes by the time she showed up, so it was strange that she already knew I spoke Korean. She also treated me like we were family, and left without a word. I didn't think I was in real danger due to being in full view of crowds and cameras, but it's an unexplained experience that has struck me for many years.
I grew up in Fort Myers, Florida, one of the most southern points of the state. Our neighborhood wasn't inherently dangerous, but could be seedy at times. Questionable characters weren't uncommon, but not anticipated. One day, when I was about 6 or 7, my friend and I wanted to have a lemonade stand in my driveway. We were pretty young, but my mom and grandma watched us from the front porch, so no one thought anything of it. Everything was fairly normal at first. Most customers consisted of a few high school girls on their way to the mall, an elderly couple walking their terrier, a young man, presumably on his way to work. At one point, my mom went inside to make lunch, and my grandma had gone to the restroom. Neither could have been gone longer than 10 minutes, but for one crucial minute, their absences overlapped. An eggshell-colored van with windows illegally tinted opaque pulled in, parking along the curb where the sidewalk dips into our driveway. The engine did not stop. The car merely idled in park as the black glass on the driver's side rolled down. "You girls selling drinks?" A rusty voice crackled from a very fair, thin man with stubble and smoker's teeth. His hair was short, if it could even be considered present. His eyes were hooded and dark despite being blue. The white tank top he wore had nondescript staining, and his arms looked dirty, a thin veil of gray polishing them. "Yes, sir," my friend answered naively. She began to pour a glass for him, giddy and unaware. we were saving up for scooters. The man's voice was unsteady and urgent as he asked, "Would you mind bringing that over here? I'm in a rush and I can't get out of the car." My friend handed me the drink and said, "Of course she will." I stared at the cup, something pressing my heels to the concrete driveway. He must have sensed my apprehension, since that was the moment he pulled out a $50 bill, seemingly from nowhere, and began to wave it in the window. I couldn't tell what was urging me to stay put when there was a yellow brick road leading me to a new scooter, and then some. I walked to the van, assuring myself that we could pack up and go inside after this transaction since we would have made so much. Somehow, that made me feel better, like this would be over quickly and this man would be gone, never to look at me again. I held the drink out to him and I said, "Here." In a predatory flash, his iron grip swallowed my petite wrist whole, closing my arm into a headlock of sweat and dirt that he had caked into his palms. I felt his nails dig into my flesh for a split second. The sound of my mom calling my name made my head turn. She was bounding out of the house with speed only a mother has. As quickly as it happened, his hand released mine. Never have 3 to 5 seconds felt like such an eternity. The van reversed into our neighbor's mailbox, only to continue rocketing down the street until it disappeared by turning down the main road behind our corner. We couldn't see the license plate that way. Cops were called, a report was made, and eventually the incident was dropped. Without a plate number, there wasn't much that could be done. But as I've gotten older, I've become more acclimated to the harsh reality of sick men in this world, and I still find myself wondering, what would have happened had my mother stayed inside a moment longer? Did he take other little girls? Was I the only one to escape? Was he ever caught? Would I have been assaulted, imprisoned, killed, or all three? Who was that man, and what otherworldly force spared my life? Hello, everyone. My name is Amanda Jane. I hope you enjoyed my narrations tonight. If so, I have a channel that I think you just might like. Head on over to the Darkest Hour YouTube channel, where I've got new scary stories every Friday night. So definitely hit that subscribe button and tap the notification bell. Thank you so much to Mort for having me, and thank you everyone for listening. And stay spooky.